In this era of automatic expertise, the Democratic professional cartoon left have yet again opined and weighed in before anybody knew anything regarding Neil Gorsuch. Immediately, without even knowing who he was, what he stood for, what he was about, immediately they were against him. Immediately. This is a state of politics in our country today. This is it. I'm checking one thing. I'm so sorry to be doing this. I hate when people type as they're doing this stuff, but I must, just for this particular instance. Nobody knows anything about Neil Gorsuch. You don't. You've never heard of him. If I told you he's with the 10th Circuit, you would say, what the hell is the 10th Circuit? What is a circuit? What is that? What does that mean? Who is he? What does he want? He must be bad, right? Because Trump is obviously appointing him, nominating him. He must be bad. And because I hate Trump and everything that is Trump, I will hate Neil Gorsuch, which is the beginning and the end, the alpha, the omega, the total scope of my political analysis. It is that simple. It is that simple, that base. That's all this is this idea that somehow if Trump were to involve himself with this, suggest it, support it, you're against it. Now, the other day I did a presentation, vlog as it were, and I've done this many times in the past. And I want you to understand a couple of aspects to this whole process. What is and isn't true, and what is and isn't repeated and regurgitated without any basis whatsoever, in fact. The first is, you will hear conservatives, prototypical conservatives, people who are archetypal, quintessential, playbook conservatives. Like a friend of mine, Sean Hannity, the other night said, my two favorite justices were Antonin Scalia and Clarence Thomas. Now, with all due respect to my dear old friend, I don't think you've read any decisions. I don't think you're really able to pass on the jurisprudence of these two. They are media darlings, conservative darlings, Heritage Foundation darlings, Federalist Society darlings. It doesn't mean they're not good. It doesn't mean you might be right or not be right. But it's like you say, my two favorite baseball players were Stan Musial and Lou Gehrig. Why? Because my father said so. And I have pretty much adopted that. I'm his son, and he knew what he was talking about, and therefore I adopt it. Doesn't mean you're wrong, but it does cast an entire light on the validity, dare I say, the worth, the depth of your analysis. Antonin Scalia, I'm going to talk about him and then Neil Gorsuch in a moment. Antonin Scalia reminded me of a fellow who passed away in New York recently, a luminary named Frankie Pellegrino. He owned Rayo's. Rayo's, I'm not going to go into too much, but Rayo's is a famous restaurant in East Harlem that, Spanish Harlem, where really the real old-time, serious, mobsters hailed from. And he was called Frankie No because whenever you called up for a reservation, he would say no. It was like 11 seats or something? I don't know, 11-seat restaurant. And it was okay. The food was all right. But it was the hype and the promotion and the glitz and the glamour and all of that he created himself. And that's why he was a genius in that respect. That was Scalia. Scalia was known by virtue of his seemingly endless series of interviews and talks and speeches and addresses before everybody there was. Now, he was certainly a great scholar. There's no doubt about this. But the Nino Scalia that people loved or hated had nothing to do with what his job was, namely being a Supreme Court Justice, an Associate Justice, Mr. Justice Scalia. That's it. But that doesn't bother anybody today because we immediately believe that we just know everything about anything, and therefore we just talk at length and ad nauseum without surcease, without any kind of, I don't know what the word is, without any kind of end, so to speak, to the discussion. Now, Neil Gorsuch would be terrific. He obviously is being selected by a Republican president because he believes that those things which the Republican president ostensibly believes in, so does this appointee, and therefore he is obviously, or most likely, to be another version of Scalia. This is why the Democrats are screwing up. If you're going to replace Scalia with basically another Scalia, keep your powder dry and wait for the next appointment, because when Kennedy steps down, or Ruth Bader Ginsburg, or whoever, that's going to be the case. That's going to be the pivotal vote. Now, let me really get down to brass tacks, and this is what you have to understand. This is what nobody wants to talk about. Justice Scalia brought this up, and you'll hear it again. I heard Laura Ingraham the other night. I was going through the various TV shows. And by the way, how about that, Trump? Doing it live on Facebook, promoting it on Facebook, and just basically reminding people through this new medium of social media medium how incredibly how gifted he is at working all of this accordingly. Laura Ingraham herself, I believe, a former clerk, learned, she said that he is an originalist, a textualist. Okay, what does this mean? Let's start from the top. What does it mean? Nothing. Nonsense. Utter schmaltz. It's one of the best. It's like when somebody says, I'm a straight shooter. I call it the way I see him. Balls and strikes. It's a way of providing intellectual cover for that which you're doing. The first rule of anybody who believes in this is to understand that what you're doing is you're saying, I am not legislating from the bench. That's a big phrase of theirs. What does that mean? It means that normally in our system of justice, we have the separation of powers. The executive, which is, of course, Article 2, this is the president. The legislative, Article 1, Congress, Senate, whatever, House of Representatives. And Article 3 are the courts. So executive, legislative, and the judiciary. The troika, the triad, the triumvirate, the trio, the three legs of the stool, so to speak. And the idea is that Congress, writes up the laws. They present a bill. The president signs it, executes it. And then the judiciary kind of reviews whether this is kosher, whether this is legal, constitutional, whatever. Judges are the only part that are of the Constitution that are not directly answerable to the people, either through a vote, through election. That's what's so critical about this. They are not in any way tied into this, whatever the word is, this ability to deal directly through them. You can always vote a legislator out. You can obviously vote a president in or out. You've got a connection as a citizen, but not the judiciary. You only come into it via the elected president, who nominates the judges for the federal position, district court, circuit court of appeal, and Supreme Court. And then, with the advice and consent of the Senate, they're ruled on. So, kind of, through the representative process, they speak for you, but not directly. Okay, good. The idea is simply this, that if you believe, let's say you're a Supreme Court justice, and you believe there should be a law against something, a law against something or a law for something, you're not able to pass legislation from the bench. You can't say, nobody's asking me this yet, but I'm going to pronounce that this particular law is unconstitutional, even though nobody's brought it, nobody's even suggested it. Or I'm going to propose this law instead of that law, or this law which might make more sense. No, that's the legislature. You're passing laws. So that kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Great. So what happens, though, is that what happens when somebody decides that they want something to be the case, but there is no precedent to piggyback off of or to base your position on, to rule for or against. I'll give you an example. One of the classic cases is Roe against Wade, this notion of privacy. They're still talking about this. It's one of the worst decisions ever, where they created this thing called privacy. Now, it just so happens that the result was good for those of us who, myself included, who believe that women should have a reproductive liberty and that this is a good thing. But as a constitutional purist, we rail against this. We say, no, you just can't make something up like this. You just can't come up with this. What? Privacy? No. What does that mean? It would be wonderful for us to be able to argue that maybe in the legislature. Here's the problem, and listen very carefully. Strict constructionists, these originalists, these textualists, and Scalia was great for this. He would always say, well, look, if you want the death penalty, go ahead and pass the statute that provides a death penalty. Or if you don't want the death penalty, just pass a law that says you don't have one. Just his whole thing was, it's the legislature. That's the way you do it. That's the way you get to debate and talk about things. But that's not what the Constitution says. And their big line is, and you can always get around anything using this line of thinking, is that the Constitution doesn't say you can, and the Constitution doesn't say you can't, depending upon what it is. If you don't like something and you want to overrule it, in essence, you can't basically say, pass a law that prohibits it because you're the Supreme Court. But you can say, the Constitution gives you no right to this. So therefore, if it's not in the Constitution, you don't have a right to do it. Then, let's say it's a statute that you do like, something that's been passed by a liberal or conservative state. If you like it, then all you have to do is say, there's nothing in the Constitution that says you can't do that. So you just fill in the blank. It's situational ethics. You just kind of it fits any particular scheme you want. It doesn't take a lot of heavy lifting. And the bottom line is that if you don't want something to occur, you are going to find a reason for it not to occur or to occur. The best example, this is so interesting. Thurgood Marshall used this as an example, as a definition. He didn't realize it, but it's been used and cited as the classic definition of judicial activism. But he said, what you do is follow your feeling, follow your gut, rule from the heart, and let the law catch up. That is as judicial activism as you can possibly get. My God, that just makes people cringe. Just the notion of that. It's just, that's the problem. Now, in a real world, okay, you're not supposed to do that. But sometimes you do. Why? Okay. Let me take you to the other fallacy. And this is what Gorsuch will have to deal with. Remember, he's getting in. He's in. He's in. There's no doubt about that. There's just this is because there's a Republican majority in both houses, and he's in. It's just going to happen. And there can be some stalling techniques. The Democrats who all of a sudden were just going crazy with Merrick Garland. Remember that? Hey, you've got to vote up or down What are you waiting for? Hey, Senate, do your job. Do your job. Now that it's Gorsuch, now they want to filibuster and drag their heel. This is why I hate politics. The hypocrisy of this is not even funny. Now, but here's the interesting thing. You're going to hear people suggest this. And this is what Scalia did. This is my favorite. Scalia and the originalists and the textualists believe that you should look at the cases, look at statutes, look at them in terms of, and this is important, in terms of what the drafters of the Constitution thought then. When the Constitution was in effect, what did they say about this? What would they say about this? They were the ones who wrote it. Let's put it in terms of what they think and what they thought. You sure you want to do that? Yes. What did they think? Well, one of the things which is the most interesting, they have this strange idea that I find interesting, and that is, pardon me for 1 second. I'm so sorry to do this. I normally don't like taking messages as I do this, but this is critical. Okay. What they do is they, at the time of the SCOTUS folks, the SCOTUS of yore, these people believed in flogging. And even Antonin Scalia said flogging would most probably be against the law today. Probably. Even though then it was completely no problem. Remember, there was the Fugitive Slave Clause. The Constitution, during their time, they had slaves. They thought nothing of it. So much so that if one of your slaves ran away, you had to return it. They even provided that as a condition of the original Constitution. Now, you want to talk about Brown against Board of Education? You want to talk about racial discrimination, affirmative action, the Bakke case? Based upon what they thought then? What? Dred Scott, it was a terrible case in retrospect, but at the time it was good law. Absolutely good law. So this is a fiction. This idea that, well, we look at the way, and not only that, try to explain to people, to look into the context about, take the Fourth Amendment and take the cases that have been written attendant to the Fourth Amendment, search and seizure, and try, if you could, try to apply some new cases involving genetic, intellectual property, genomes, data, clouds, search and seizure, privacy, NSA, metadata versus, now Scalia will tell you, well, there's nothing at all that would prevent you from applying classic textual or contextual fiats and constitutional imprimaturs that would allow us to apply those of our forebears today. What? There comes a time, Nino, that oh, and by the way, if you think that I'm buying this story, that he was found in some Illuminati hunting lodge with a pillow on his head, there was a pillow on his head, where they did autopsies over the phone. If you think I'm buying that one, that's for another time, okay? That is for another time, but come on. But going back to Nino, this idea that somehow we can apply these things so easily it's farcical. Now, I understand the basics and bases of this, but the Constitution, to an extent, and these guys hate this, it is a living document because things change. Plessy against Ferguson, separate but equal. Loving against Virginia, the anti-miscegenation cases, the internment cases. One time on radio, somebody called them interment, which is burial, which is a different story. But all of those, it's a different world now. I don't know. Maybe when the internment, who knows? Maybe internment. I did it myself. Maybe it's a different story. But it's a different time now. Maybe the Constitution is on a living document. Maybe we, in our mores and ethos, and maybe we are an evolving group of people, an evolving sect, an evolving country whose mores change. I don't know. But here's what Nino also doesn't get. Let's use his idea. Let's say that in the state of Florida, they pass a law forbidding abortion. It is against the law in Florida to go to your doctor. Let's make it simple. Not that there's criminal sanctions, but it is against the law. You cannot get an abortion in Florida. Okay. Let's say you're a Floridian and you want to avail yourself of a termination of pregnancy. What are you supposed to do? Hey, Nino, isn't there some constitutional right? No, there's not. Nothing in the Constitution about this. But you can go to another state if you'd like, someplace where they do have the abortion. Yeah, but I don't want to go to, where's the other next state? Texas? I don't want to go to Texas. Why do I have to go to Texas? Well, this is Florida's right. Take it up with your legislature. Wait a minute. Let's assume further that there is no abortion state by state by state, because let's say it's this either right-wing or Republican or whatever it is majority. Is there no constitutional right to this? Let me go a step further. Let's assume there are these ideas of people who want to roll back some of the civil rights legislation in a particular state, in Georgia, in Florida, New York. I mean, don't they have the right to do that? Can't they debate this? Tyranny by the majority? Can't they do this? Can we say, wait, you can't overrule Browning's Board of Education? Well, I mean, there's nothing in the Constitution that says you have a right to go to school or to have integration. What's wrong with why is all right, let's assume they're going to relitigate this again. No. My question to Nino would be, is there anything called broad constitutional application that applies in the nation? That goes in the nation versus this minimalistic breakdown? Aren't there some things that we say, no, this is going to be absolutely guaranteed as the law? And it's going to be nationwide, not just state by state. So that's the argument against Nino, who says, just let us state decide. There's no constitutional right to this. Look, the Constitution has no mention. They talk about an army, they talk about the Navy, but there's no mention of an Air Force. Now, there are no constitutional prohibitions against the Army or the Navy having an aeronautic, wing, but a separate Air Force, the Army Air Corps, remember that? And then the United States Air Force. That's not in the Constitution. There's not even anything that specifically decides how many justices there are. They give that to the Congress. There's a lot of things in there. They don't even mention marriage. The Constitution is absolutely empty as to what most of us would consider to be pretty basic, agreed to things, because it's not necessarily a right. And then you get into the idea, if you were somehow to go back into time, because we always love to second guess our forebears, to ask them, what was it exactly that you were thinking about when you passed this Constitution? What was it exactly? What were you trying to do? The Bill of Rights came, 1789 later. And the 14th Amendment, which was that's what really affects most people, because that affects your being limited and affected by the states. That came post-Civil War, post-Reconstruction. The original drafters, the original intent, these people didn't recognize women. That's right, women walking around with the foam vagina hats and the pussy hats or whatever you call those things. They weren't even really given any kind of status until after slavery was abolished. through the 19th Amendment, they got the vote. 13th Amendment abolished slavery. I mean, this is. Do you see this? But what happened is Nino gets such a rousing round of applause from the Federalist Society and all of his conservative people who were trying to find a way to limit rights, to limit freedoms, to cut gay rights people. That's not their goal, but it was used. You want to cut governmental programs? Use this idea. You want to say that there's nothing wrong against charging somebody criminally with having oral sex, man or woman, married or not? Go ahead. Just say there was nothing in the Constitution. Just use this originalism. It gets you around, and it sounds so great. And when Nino was met with applause by all of his Federalist acolytes and apostles and minions and bootlickers and lickspittles and toadies and obsequious fawning apostles of his originalism, he just kept doing it more and more, and then he became a rock star. I mean, you can go on YouTube and see him speak before he spoke before, I think, the Bug Tussle, Sir Thomas, once a month luncheon meeting. I mean, this guy spoke everywhere. And I must say that I always have been very much enamored by people who are gutsy enough to say what they think. You know, I like that. And he is to be commended. He was probably one of the most famous justices, maybe since William O. Douglas. In terms of being really rambunctious, but not rock star status. And he became the lightning rod for, and here we go again, for judicial conservatism, but the professional left, the cartoon left, hated him again because they don't like strong-willed, obstreperous, openly contemptuous people who laugh and mock and deride your exhibitions of sincerity. That's what drove them nuts. It just was something that, it was, again, same thing with Trump. It's not about policy. It's because basically if you act like a jerk, they will focus all of their hate. And right now, we are 12 days into this event, this term, and people are going. The stories that are coming out about Ivanka, Jared Kushner, Steve Bannon. They were saying today, did Ivanka have face work? Did she have? I mean, they're going. The Barron, Melania, the Sons. Forget the policy. It's personal. This is the beginning and the end. See, in Jon Stewart and Colbert and these others, they typify the collective idea regarding their approach to this because it's personal. They don't know anything about Scalia or really what Trump's anything. It's nothing. It's that we're going to call him. We're going to make fun of his hair. Stewart did come out and have this one thing which is interesting. He came out with this tie that was basically almost tripping on. I always wonder, why is your red tie so long? Ideally, most people say it should touch the bottom of the tie. The large part should touch the top of your belt. But this thing is, So that was cute. And of course, mentioning his hair or his tanning spray or whatever it is. That's it. That's the genius of Jon Stewart, who, by the way, must be thinking, why in the hell did I decide to retire now before? I mean, did he not know? He probably thought there's no way the Trump administration is going to win. I can't do 4 more years of kissing up to Hillary. Yeah, now's the time to leave. Boy, surprise, surprise. And also he's trying to prop up that Colbert show, who, by the way, do the names Borat and Pee Wee Herman come to mind? I mean, think about this. This is the most... Imagine having an alter ego that looks identical to you. Remember Patty Duke show? Patty the millionaire. Right. Well, Patty and... It was Patty. Who was Kathy? Who was the cousin? Kathy. So you could at least say had an accent. I know it's different. I know it's a sitcom and it's a different story. But there was always a way to tell them apart. Colbert looks the same, acts acts the same, doesn't do anything different, and now he's going to be slipping in and out. The other night they wrote something. They said he's going to be going back to his old character. How do you know? Does he have a sign? Does he wear a lapel like a color of the day, like the cops do, like NYPD does in the subway, so they know who's an undercover cop? I mean, it's just devolved. So they're not going to be talking about anything about the issue of jurisprudence or stare decisis or any of that other kind of stuff. They're going to be talking about the fact that they hated Nino and they hate Trump because why? Because they're strong, abrasive people who frankly don't give a damn what the professional cartoon alt-left fake news world thinks. I hope that added a little bit to your understanding. Gorsuch will be the nominee. He will ultimately be approved. He will be confirmed, and he's the next Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States. Thank you very much. Like this particular video, and of course, subscribe to the channel, and always comment as you see fit.